Hi there, guys. Candy here, your thrifty apprentice, and happy Friday, everybody. It is a beautiful day here in Dallas, and I hope everyone is really enjoying the start to their weekend. Today's video, we are doing I am doing the first field test for the Masters Touch Fine Art Studio colored pencil. This is a 48 count set, which I picked up from my local Hobby Lobby, and I need to really go ahead and get them tested and reviewed for some future videos that really need to go ahead and come out, to say the least. So I'm going to be using quite a few colors here. I am painting a illustration of spools of thread. I've been working on some journals and doing a little sewing. Had some spools sitting around the studio. I figured they would be a perfect inspiration for a quick illustration with these pencils. And with painting the spools of thread, it would also be like, doing really big blending blocks or blending spheres, so to speak. Give me a really good idea and feel for how the pencils are going to blend and layer, and all of those good things in jazz. Very, very good. So, laid down some base color here, just blocking in. Colors that I'm going to be using are white and lemon yellow, medium yellow, light brown, khaki, apricot, mandarin orange, vermilion, light lavender, dark lavender, silver gray, and of course black to tie it all together. Now that may sound like a lot of colors, but that's actually a pretty limited palette when you're using colored pencils and you have a range of 48. So I laid down the base layer of the small spool, the lemon yellow, the base layer of the bigger spool with the light lavender. Afterwards, I'm going to go in and start with my secondary color shading on my yellow spool. There, I'm going to be using medium yellow, and I'm actually going to go back and forth between medium yellow and khaki in order to get in that medium range tone. And I'm just bringing in strokes from the side of the cylinder in towards the lighter part of the middle of the cylinder. Now, I'm not covering the entire thing, but what I'm doing is adding the shading to the ends, which is going to give the cylinder roundness, start to add dimension and some realism. Now, again, back and forth with this cylinder, I'm doing medium yellow and khaki. Now, I'm not sure what these colors would equate to in another pencil set, because like most budget pencils or economical pencils, sometimes the companies give the colors, not the traditional names, but the little cutesy-ootsy names, and this one of these cutesy-ootsy names happens to be khaki. Now, I did not use yellow ochre. This is actually light brown. I thought it was a really beautiful color to help add in the shadowing and the shading for the yellow tones. And once again, I'm doing the exact same thing that I did with the mid-range with the dark here. I'm starting in at the corner of the cylinder. I'm covering the edge of my threaded spool, and then I'm bringing those strokes in towards the middle or the lighter part of the cylinder in the middle. Now again, we're not going to go all the way across, but we're just adding dimension. Now, with color pencils, I'm actually layering here. I'm not, and as I layer, the colors are starting to blend. I'm not using a lot of pressure, and you will see me kind of go back and forth between the mid-tone colors, which were the khaki and the medium yellow, and the darker range color here, which is the light brown. And repeating, I'm just adding I'm just adding shape to the cylinder, back and forth. Both sides, bringing those strokes in. Every now and then I will drag one of those dark strokes all the way across the cylinder, just so I can start to give the impression of single or individual strands of thread on the spool. This is really fun. Sort of like doing a big blending ball in a cylinder shape. If you've never tried this, I say give it a try. Painting small things like this allow you to concentrate a little bit more on the details, and concentrating on details help you practice and bring into fruition more realism in your paintings, or at least that has been my experience. So now it took me about an hour to do this painting, I want to say, or this illustration, should I say. Of course, it's been sped up, so this video is only about 20 minutes. So don't think that it just took me 20 minutes, although it's simple. It did take me an hour, so just be sure that if you decide to try this with whatever brand of product you choose, take your time. Be patient with yourself. Look at your object, visualize your object, and paint or draw what you see. Be sure to draw what you see. Now, the reference photo for this video, I'm going to actually try to link in the video description. If I can remember, I hope I don't forget. But it will be like the outline drawing for the spools of thread. And then if I can remember, I also snap a picture of the actual spool of thread that was on my sewing machine at the time that I decided to do this. Now, after I covered the entire spool with the darker color, I went back in and shaded down the middle with a white pencil in order to give lightness to it, make it bounce off the middle of that spool. Then I covered the entire thing with the base layer, which was the lemon yellow color again, in order to blend those colors together. I didn't use any Gamsol or spirits, baby oil, anything like that. I actually used the pressure from the pencil to blend them together, and I have to say I was pretty impressed. The last couple of sets of budget pencils, colored pencils anyway, that I've tried have not been very disappointing at all. And from the little bit that I've done with these pencils, from the swatching to this first painting, I was starting to think to myself, like, have I found another gem? I mean, they're so buttery and so smooth, and they kind of just glide on. I did not have to use a lot of pressure, and they blend together really, really well for this to be the very first composition that I was doing with them. Yeah, wasn't disappointed at all. Now I'm going to go ahead and jump in and do the spool head and the tail of the spool, where the thread will be wrapped around. Now, the colors I used there were the apricot, the mandarin orange, and the vermilion. Apricot was the base layer. Mandarin orange is my secondary layer that I use to shade in towards the center. And the vermilion was used as the dark tone to saturate, give shape and roundness to the actual spool that the thread was on. And then, of course, I use white to throw in highlights. And I'm actually going to use that same method to shade in all four spool heads that you see sticking out at the time that I do them. Now here I'm going back in with that mid-tone color, which was the medium yellow, and I'm bringing strokes all the way across the spool because, again, I want to give that impression of those individual strand of threads that you'll be able to see. Now, although I didn't do it here at this particular point, I am going to eventually go in and kind of add little strings of threads spewing out of those spools into the air, which you'll see shortly. Here, you're just going to see me doing the other end of that spool, and I do it the exact same way. Base layer with the apricot, use my mandarin orange to shade in for my mid-tone, and then my dark tone was the vermilion. Covered it all up with the apricot base layer, some white on top, just to add in that highlight. Now, I imagined in my head that the light was coming from the front. So you're going to see a lot of highlighting on the spool as if though the light would be coming from the front or from behind the viewer that was looking at the spool. I hope that makes sense. That's why you see me doing the highlights in the areas that you see me doing them in. And yeah, back and forth. Now, this is, a little tedious. Any color pencil painting is. Unlike paints or watercolor pencils, or maybe a lot of other water-soluble mediums, this is one that you have to take your time with, and you do have to put in some effort and some work, but the results are normally really, really good if you take your time and put in that effort. Here we switched over to doing the purple spool, and we're actually going to be doing this one exactly the same way that we did the yellow. There is no difference in it. I used the base layer of light lavender to block in the entire spool. Then I went in with my mid-tone, which was just a regular lavender, and I'm going to be using that to shade in the sides, bringing it in towards the middle like we did with the yellow one in order to start creating dimension and adding roundness to the spool of thread. This one took a little bit more time, of course, because it's much bigger than the yellow spool was, but the method and the technique for it is exactly the same. And we're going to switch over to throwing in the darker tone, which is actually dark lavender, and that is what's going to add in our shadows and our shadings to the very side in order to give that final oomph of color that we need in order to round out those spools of thread. I'm going to take my time. Here's the thing. These pencils are layered really well, right? So, like, you see here that color is going down really saturated, but I'm not using a lot of pressure at all. Like, seriously, there was no fatigue when I used these pencils and when I did this composition. They held a really nice point. Although the lid is really soft and it will wear fast. Will wear fast. It'll wear down fast. That's what I'm trying to say. It really, really will. But that's because they're light and soft and buttery, and that was really nice. I thought that was pretty cool. After I got in my darker tone, I decided I needed to bring that mid-range tone out a little bit more. So I am going to be taking that regular lavender color, as you can see here, and I'm covering where I did the dark area, but I'm just extending it out beyond a little bit more into the middle. After I was done with that, I'm going to blend all those colors together. I'm going back in. Oh, well, actually, first, I'm taking that white and I'm going down the middle in order to add in my highlight, or the base part of my highlight. And now I'm going back in with the base color, which was the light lavender. And I'm going to use that to blend all of those colors together by adding more pressure. It's going to, of course, add more saturation to the base color, and it's going to push all of those pigments from those other colors together into a smoother transition. This is known as varnishing, and it is a wonderful technique. Wonderful technique. So I'm just going to take my time and get all of this done. Like I said, much bigger than the yellow one, so it takes some time. It really took some time. But you know what, guys? I actually like pencils. As you guys know, watercolor pencils are my favorite. And I find that I think that my artwork comes out a little bit better when I'm using pencils versus maybe paints. Or maybe it's all just in my head. Or maybe that's why I like using paints and pencils together. Who knows? Either way, I have fun when I'm doing it. That's all that really matters, right? I'm going back in here and adding in some more saturation to the darker tone, the dark violet, not violet, but the dark lavender. And then afterwards, I'm going to go back in and shade a little bit more with that white. It's doing a little bit more blending and bringing those colors together right across the area where you would expect it to be reflecting a little light. And then here I'm going to go ahead and do the top and the bottom of this spool in the exact same method that I did the smaller yellow spool, using the apricot and the mandarin orange, vermilion, and white. And that's gonna, that's how this was. As you can see, it wasn't really super complicated. You just have to really pay attention to the detail. You have to pay attention to your stroke, the way you're coloring. Be sure to use directional coloring, remembering the whole time the direction that a thread runs in when it's on a spool. All of that helps lend to what the mind automatically picks up on or perceives the minute it looks at the actual illustration. Once I got all of that settled and done the way I thought it would be, that got it to the point that I wanted to. That's what I'm trying to say. Kind of a little tongue-tied there. I went on to start throwing in my shadows. Now, for my shadows, I used silver gray, dark gray, and then black. Now, the black here is sort of opaque and saturated. I thought it was a pretty good black. The white itself, not as saturated as like a Prismacolor white, of course. Most pencils aren't, but it was okay. It was a good blending white. It laid down a little color, as you got to see. It would layer on top of the other colors with no problems. It was just as soft and buttery as the other pencils that I used. So I guess I don't have any complaints other than the fact that it could have been a little more saturated. It wouldn't have hurt. After I got my shadows the way I wanted, I went back in with a black pencil, and here I'm just going to kind of do in all of my final shading and details, adding in a little darker line up under the area where the spool would actually be touching the surface that it's sitting on. And then I'm going to go in and add in a few details here and there just to make sure you can tell the separation in the different parts of the spool, like where the thread itself meets the spool, and just to add a little bit more dimension right down those areas where there would be shadow, just adding a little deeper, richer color. I'll tell you, using indigo blue would probably be another great color. Like if you didn't really want the harshness of black, if you thought maybe it was too stark, or if it's going to give you a little bit too much contrast, you could try using an indigo blue to do these little details that I'm doing now instead of using a black. Now, I would still suggest the black for the shadow, especially the area where the spool touches the surface. But where you see me using the black in order to add in those fine little details and sharpness to the lines around the spool and the thread, that's where I was saying you could actually use indigo blue, and I think it would work just as well. Just as well. Now, I dropped my pencil there. Try not to drop your pencils. Try never to drop your pencils, right? And after I picked it up, I'm just going in and adding in those final little lines of darkness and depth into the spools themselves, just so it can help individual threads stand out a little bit more. Just getting all of that final detail. And then I'm going to jump in with some white gel pen, and I want to do some highlighting. Keeping in mind, as I highlighted, as I stated earlier, the light source in my mind was coming from the front of the spool of threads, so kind of end up throwing white gel pen on a lot of areas for this spool of thread because, it would have had a lot of light reflecting. Now here I decided I needed to add some individual strings of thread coming off of those spools just to help out the idea of the whole composition and to give it a little movement. It seemed a little, a little stark, a little flat. I wasn't using paints, so I couldn't splatter. And I thought, well, this would be a great way to add a little movement to the composition without just going too crazy. And finally, in the end, I decided to add in that little twisting thread coming off the top of that yellow spool, which, ironically enough, that yellow went through that black pretty well. You can still see the shadow on that spool, on that individual string, but it wasn't too bad. It actually, these pencils were not too bad. For the first composition illustration out the gate, I'll have to say that I did not find them to be bad at all. I am going to do a couple of other paintings with them, or illustrations with them, use them in a couple of other mixed media aspects before I jump into doing a review and offering what I think on them. But so far, definitely so good from the first painting. Well, guys, I'm going to go ahead and throw in some highlights here. I'm going to hit the spool of thread, again, highlighting individual threads so that they would stand out a little bit more, going down the middle of both of those spools in the area where the light would be hitting, just to add a little bit more glistening to it, so to speak, right? And then I'm going to be sure to hit these spools themselves because you will have light bouncing off of those as well. Just, wherever I feel like light should go. That's pretty much going to bring it to an end when we're done with that, guys. I really thank you guys for joining me. I'm sorry about the late release this Friday. Hopefully you guys picked up on some tips, tricks, techniques, or something that will help you. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, or if anything jumped out at you. Please subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you know when the other content is coming out. Remember that sharing is caring, and there may be someone else out there who wants to see or needs to see this information, so don't forget to share. You can check us out on all the social media sites, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Don't forget about the Thrifty Apprentice sponsored Facebook group. paints, pencils, pastels, and markers, where we do all things artsy and crafty. Wonderful, wonderful place. There is a link in the video description for that. If you guys are ever interested, you can check out my Etsy shop. There's a link in the video description for that. There's also a link for my most recommended products right now. Great, wonderful, economical products that won't break the bank, but that are good in quality and will definitely get the job done. I'm always looking for another wonderful workhorse to suggest to my viewers. So I'm just going to finish up highlighting here. And remember, as I tell you guys at the end of every video, just keep painting and crafting.